President Trump's day one executive orders are already making waves, aiming to not only tackle housing affordability, but also the cost of living crisis. But the question is, will they help or hurt first-time homebuyers like you? In today's episode, we're going to break down the policies, highlight the potential impacts, and help you understand what it means for your home buying journey.
Absolutely. This is an important topic. It matters. If you are listening here, you are in the market. We have a large generational cohort of late millennials, early Gen Z that are of prime home buying age. They want to get into the market. They're suffering with affordability, high home prices, high building costs, high interest rates. While not historically high, they're recent historically very, very high in terms of interest rates, just affordability. So there's a lot that a president can do to dictate policy, cause the conversation to go in one direction. So what we're here to talk about today, and we've been covering, what does Trump want to do? What is he going to do? How does it play out? We got the first look. On Inauguration Day, I think the plan was to sign 150 executive orders. He got over 100 of them in one day. The vast majority of them have nothing to do with housing and will have zero impact. But what we're going to talk about today is the ones that do, that are very important. And there's a couple different angles at it. And for me, when I look at the things, the energy policy, his famous saying, drill, baby, drill, which we want to do that safely. But we saw, I don't have the numbers here in front of me, Jeb, but we saw a number from a research house that said their expectation is with the change in policy and additional drilling, that crude oil will drop from current prices down to about $57. I think we're at 79, somewhere in that range. It's been over 80 in the last few weeks, down to $57 by 2027. So you go, well, who cares? Why are you talking about gas prices when we're talking about, I want to get into a home? The price of oil works its way into almost everything. The prices of everything impact inflation. When inflation is higher, investors in treasury bonds and mortgage bonds require a greater yield, meaning you, the borrower, pay a higher interest rate. So if we have a 25% reduction in the biggest energy input that we have in oil prices over the next 3 years, that's a positive. It's a positive for inflation, positive for interest rates, positive for affordability. So that one, I don't even think there's a whole lot of doubt. For the next 3 or 4 years, that is going to be the direction that's going to go. Some of these things that we're going to talk about, Jeb, they're still open to debate. Those executive orders were more of a policy statement of what we would like to do. The oil stuff is going to be a repeat of 2016 to 2020, where we saw really low oil prices, which will be good for inflation.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand when talking about Trump, talking about policies, executive orders, all of these different things that you see a lot of headlines for, right? They're big headline news grabbers, but then when you start reading into the context, there's not a lot of detail. And that's because there's not a lot of detail at the moment. It's very high level in how we're covering this because we don't truly know the impact of how some of these things are going to work their way through, through the economy, through housing, through just different things out there that could end up impacting you. Now, the one that you just mentioned, Josh, on, inflation and oil prices having that pass-through effect to everything, that's huge, right? Because one of the big drivers of higher mortgage rates now was that this idea that everything Trump is going to do is inflationary. Well, if he's able to bring inflation down in one area, yeah, maybe it goes up in some other areas. But if we're still status quo across the board, that's a positive for the market and allows mortgage rates to come down. But let's talk about one of the first executive orders he signed the night that he was inaugurated and became our 47th president was this emergency price relief when it comes to housing. What does that even mean, Josh? Does that impact somebody now? Or is that something we're talking 3, 4, 5 years down the road?
Again, of all of them that you and I pay close to, 100 of them, unless you're a true policy wonk that you're just sitting there reading and dissecting this stuff, we looked at the ones that were important. You sent that over. You looked at it. I looked at it. We kind of gone back and forth. It truly is more of a policy statement and a direction of what this administration wants to do over the next 4 years versus something concrete. So it's not concrete yet. So there's absolutely no timeline on when this is going to impact you. So Could it be positive? Could it be good over the coming years? Absolutely. But does that mean that there's something, if you're thinking of buying in 2025, I don't think there's any impact. Let's talk about some of the things within there. They made reference to one of the talking points of the National Association of Home Builders, that regulation adds 25% to the cost of building a home. Say the new median home price is $440,000. We're talking $110,000 that they claim are adding. And when we talk about that, we've talked extensively on the show, Jeb, planning, permitting, government regulations, all that stuff. Well, the government regulation part, a lot of what people don't think about if you're outside of California, if you're inside of California, you realize the fun things that you have to have. Tankless water heaters, solar to a certain amount of capacity, storage batteries. So these things are good. They're good over the long haul, but to make it a blanket requirement that every homeowner needs to have that, to a degree, those are luxury items. To some degree, I'm not saying that it truly is a luxury item, but I don't have solar on my house. I get by without it. So I think
How?
It's a miracle, right? In general, most people want these things. Would you like a tankless water heater? Would you like, a zero E rating house that, it's net zero and you don't have any electricity costs or heating costs? That's all good. But when you look at it, there's a cost to it. So everything's a trade-off. And what we've done over the last 4 years is not acknowledging a trade-off, just saying these are good things. We don't care about the cost. So again, this is more of a policy statement of the way we're going to proceed, of a cost benefit analysis versus just saying this is a good and we are going to pursue that as policy regardless of the cost.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. I mean, I've mentioned this stat several times on the show over the years, and that's, I think it was either 2023 or 2022, Dallas. The city of Dallas built more homes than the entire state of California built. Now, part of that is they have more available land and some other things, but a lot of it has to do with regulation, with all of these double things that you have to do when building a house. It's, if you're building a house near the coast, not only do you have to get meet certain guidelines, then you have to get the Coastal Commission involved, which are layers upon layers upon layers. And so a lot of housing is like that. It's this multi-layered process that could really be stripped down to a couple of things. And when you strip that stuff down and remove some of these costs, the cost of housing becomes more affordable. Now, does that translate into existing homes and everything else? Not quite as easy to pass that along. It's more so in the new construction piece, but that's really where we're suffering as a nation with regard to supply and demand. We're missing a lot of homes out there, Josh, and in order to fix this problem, we have to build more.
Jeb, this is where this discussion can really get political. I mean, really, it's 50-50 nation. So every election comes down to 49-51, 50-50. And some people hear this and go, great. Other people want to politicize it and say, oh, we're talking about deregulation. They're going to make houses out of paper and they're going to blow away in the wind. That is not at all what we are talking about.
It could be made of sand.
Here is probably my best example. We just had a terrible tragedy here in Southern California. Thousands of homes lost to fire. Guess what is going to happen when those houses get rebuilt? Expedited permitting. We're going to get real lax on some of those ridiculous guidelines. So we're going to decrease the time frame to rebuild those homes. Time is money. You have carrying costs, building costs, all those things. Time is money. So we're going to shorten the timeline. We're going to decrease the regulations because we can. That tells you that there's play in the joints. So no one is talking about making cheap homes, crappy homes, disposable homes, just jacking up builder profits. So on the second topic there, okay, let's say that Trump had a magic Sharpie, and on Monday night, he signed an executive order that immediately dropped planning and permitting costs by 25% for a home. So you drop $100,000. A builder has inventory that they built under the old regulations and old costs, and now they have new inventory. Do we really think that inventory is going to come to market $100,000 cheaper or 25% cheaper? It is not. The market dictates the prices, and just like the changes with realtor commissions over the last 6 to 12 months, hasn't had a huge impact on home prices yet. It would take years for that to integrate in. So again, when we say no one has a magic Sharpie, they can't do that overnight, even Trump. And when we talk about this, How much of it are they going to get and over what time frame? So I think in the big picture, this is positive because the pendulum had gone too far one direction where we're over-regulated, over-dictating some of the good and cool things that many people do want in their homes, but that first-time buyers can't necessarily afford. So really, if this isn't even, hey, we're going to get you an update in 6 months. This is like, next inauguration day, let's do a look back episode and go, how'd it work out? Did we make any progress?
No, I mean, executive orders, like we were talking before we come on here, they're 2 pages. Like it is not a lot of detail, right? It is a blanket statement. And hey, I want these things to happen. And that's essentially what Trump said. Hey, you need to essentially make housing more affordable, right? You need to cut cost on housing so that, it's less expensive. But he's not giving them any direction other than, it would be nice to cut it by so and so percent. That it's not a mandatory statement that these, things have to happen. It's just a suggestion and hey, let's revisit this in 90 days. So that's essentially what we're talking about here. These are things that have been thrown out there that we're going to have to continuously revisit to see how it's having an impact and how it's, is it positive for you? Is it negative for you? Which leads me into the next one, Josh, which is tariffs. It's been this big thing leading up to the inauguration, and now we have not a lot of clarity, but we have a little bit more clarity because day one it wasn't this blanket statement across the board that now 25% tariffs on Canada, 25% on Mexico, 25% on China. It was another, there were groups formed and I'm political, whatever we're talking about here. I'm missing the name of group. But essentially these parties that were created to help, give advice and help the regulation process, which quite frankly could be a positive thing for the market because it's not one person just throwing their opinion out. It's now we're getting the opinion of smarter people, of masses in order to help make those decisions.
Let's look at who were the targets. China was the number one target when he's threatening them. Then the next two are Canada and Mexico. So as of right now, China is off the table, or at least not in the discussion right now. Does that mean that that China is not still in his crosshairs? No, it absolutely doesn't. But what has he done? Two active steps here. He's planning a trip to China. So it tells you that he sees it as important. He doesn't want a war, a trade war with them. He wants what he wants, and he wants things to change. And if we look at it, Jeb, you and I looked at a really long academic paper yesterday about tariffs are probably appropriate with China. They are dumping their cheap labor on the rest of the world because their people don't consume all of the things that they manufacture very cheaply. So tariffs could be very appropriate there. But there's unintended consequences. There's intended consequences there. The trip there tells you that he's serious about engaging them and finding a win-win solution. Trump loves win-win, especially when Trump wins. Second piece of that, we saw the TikTok stuff. He was the one that in 2018, 2019 said, hey, this is BS. We got to get rid of TikTok. And we finally get on the doorstep of shutting it down. They shut it down for 36 hours or whatever. And he gives them a stay of execution. So it tells you that he's looking for win-win solutions and not these draconian things in terms of tariffs that the market was fearing. Now, in terms of of Mexico and Canada, I confuse China and Canada. They're very similar, right? So Canada and Mexico, Trump himself renegotiated NAFTA to a new trade agreement, North American trade agreement, and now he doesn't like it. He literally, at the time, this is pure Trump. At the time, he said this is the greatest trade agreement ever agreed to. And now, 4 years later, he doesn't love it, and so he wants to renegotiate it. So there is still a threat of tariffs. Everyone was worried, and he had threatened with those executive orders on day one, tariffs are coming. So we have Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. He's a hedge fund manager. He's sort of the voice of reason in that room. And he's saying, hey, tariffs might be appropriate, but let's be reasoned and rational about it. And as you said, they're talking about putting committees together. Committee,
that's the word I was looking for.
Committees of several educated adults with knowledge and experience in this sphere. So the market's like that so far. After the jobs report, we ran up to about 480 on the 10-year, 4.80, 4.81. And at the best levels, yesterday after inauguration, we were at like 4.53. We're still up at 4.6, but you're seeing that the market is going, okay, we had priced in our worst fears, and thus far, our worst fears are not coming to fruition in terms of the tariffs, which could be the most inflationary. So for me, the ones that are important over the short run is the slower and measured use of tariffs and the changes in oil regulation. And just the overall deregulation in general. Again, if you look at the executive orders, they're not binding, they're short, they're brief, but they do talk about the soundness of the government. We're not talking about taking away regulations that are valid, valuable, and needed. It's saying, let's not over-regulate. We had that Chevron settlement by the Supreme Court, basically saying that these regulatory agencies, whether it's the CFPB, whoever it is, they cannot legislate. And I guess big picture, I'll have a small political rant here. This is not Democrat, Republican. This is between executive orders and between agencies being able to write their own policy and then enforce it. We have gotten away from the Congress doing what they're supposed to do, which is actually pass legislation. These executive orders, big picture, if you love what Trump did or if you hate what Trump did on Monday, let's realize that they are stupid because half of those ones were undoing what Biden did. Well, on Biden's inauguration day or the first week, half of his were undoing what Trump did. They're just the stroke of a pen. That is not the way our government is supposed to work. If you look over time, the use of executive orders has increased. And we need to get back to the people that we elect through our elections every 4 years, every 2 years for Senate and Congress, of them actually doing the work of passing good and solid legislation versus these executive orders and government agencies dictating what we're supposed to do and what we're supposed to follow. So you've heard what Jeb and I think so far, but what do you think? If you're listening at home, you've been watching the news the last couple of days, do you think these policies are going to help or hurt housing? Let us know down in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. Send us a message if you're on Spotify, info@theeducatedhomebuyer. Share it with us. We would love to hear what you're thinking.
Now, with that, Josh, I mean, moving along, if you will, we've talked about, the executive order on price relief, we've talked about inflation and how these things pass through, tariffs and all of that. Immigration is one that was kind of, big in conversation leading up to the election. Executive order wise, there's no mass deportation at the moment. So this is something that if there's deportation, it's going to work its way through. Logan from Housing Wire recent put out some stats that, looking back again, not a political statement, but Biden actually deported more immigrants than Trump did. In fact, Trump's kind of at the bottom of the list. Obama had deported more immigrants than Trump did. So, is Trump going to, do this mass deportation? Is it going to affect housing and building and construction? There's a possibility of it. But again, you're so far down the road at this point. I mean, this is time. This is not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to work its way through the system in 3 months. I mean, you're talking probably, 6+ a year plus, if it has any effect at all. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's absurd that the way this is described as we have undocumented skilled labor building houses or doing other skilled labor that we need in the U.S. And Trump is going to go find those people and kick them out. And we're not going to have anyone to do the work because Americans don't want to do it. That is the most ignorant, lame straw man argument, because you have the ability. You first have to step back and say, does he have the ability to do it? Does he want to do it? One. Then does he have the ability to do it? And then will he do it? And the answer is no on almost all fronts. If you see the things they're talking about is we were not vetting the people that were allowed in the country on an unprecedented scale over the last 4 years. So if he had a magic wand, the magic wand is the worst of the worst, the criminals, the people that wouldn't have passed the background checks. If we could track them down and find them and deport them, he would do that. And I think 65% of Americans would agree with that. There's other things that are kind of crazy that you get into where he's talking about taking away birthright citizenship, things of that sort. I think they're we're not even going to get into it. It doesn't impact what we're talking about here. And all of the things that we talk about that will impact and align with housing, I'm sure there are hardcores on either side of the debate that will say this is the worst thing ever in the history of the world. But I think these are all good, but they're going to take all good for the housing market, but they're going to take time to play out. And we're saying all good right now. We're 3 days into this as we record. Come back in a month or two, we could have terrible tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, and we're going, oh, this is really bad. The inflation is going to go up. The cost of goods is going to go up. Basically, we talk about, what did the American voters say in November? Well, one of the things that they said loudly wasn't, I don't care about those two personalities. They say, I hate inflation. Many of the things that Trump in a vacuum would like to do are inflationary. And Trump loves to be loved. And everyone saw on election day, no one in Washington, D.C. is going to be loved if inflation remains high. So I personally, based off of his ego and desire to be loved, I would be surprised if he pushes through policies that would be inflationary. You and I were talking yesterday, Jeb. I feel like the first time he came in, he was an outsider, a non-politician. And to a large degree, there was some amateur hour there in terms of the people that he put into power in his cabinet and what they were allowed to do and what they were allowed to advise. If you heard him talking, I mean, even if you're a liberal, you're a hardcore Democrat, you can't stand the sound of Trump's voice. I get it. That's a reaction that many people have. But if you hear him talk 8 years later, he's not an amateur at this anymore. You may not agree with him. He may still be doing things you don't like, but the people that he is putting in place to make these decisions, like Scott Bessent at the Treasury, are just light years ahead of the people he was relying on 8 years ago. So I expect the adults in the room, for lack of a better word, are going to stay in control, and he is going to push through what he wants, but they're going to be tempered in a way that will be productive and most likely to lead to the outcome that leaves him with the positive legacy that he would like. That may be Pollyanna-ish. And if you come back in 6 months or 2 years and say, you're an idiot, it all blew up, I'm not going to be shocked, but that's where my head's at right now.
Before we go any further, I'd like to ask a favor of the audience. If you're finding any value in our content at all, do us a favor, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you want to stay updated on everything housing. And if you've been here for any extended period of time and you found any value in our videos, do us a favor and let us know in the comments, because we really value reading how we've helped our audience. All right. So with that, Josh, we've talked about volatility in the market. That's what's causing, rates to bounce around, causing rates to go up. It's just this uncertainty. So if you're a first-time home buyer out there in the market at the moment, you're trying to navigate uncertainty, what to watch for. If you were giving advice to these people, what would you say?
The biggest advice is don't get hung up in the day-to-day of this. Realize what is likely to only impact the housing market in the longer term and what is likely to move it in the shorter term. Anything that's inflationary or the market that deems inflationary is going to impact interest rates. Housing itself, new home sales, existing home sales, is very impacted by interest rate movements. We see that annualized pace of sales jumps when we drop down near 6% or below it. It drops considerably when we get up and above 7%. So anything that's inflationary that leads to that, which could even be, things like immigration. If we have a bunch of labor deported and now unemployment drops and employers are having to pay, all of these things can be inflationary. For me, when I'm looking at it, I'm looking at jobs and inflation much more than anything else. The other stuff is longer term. And if you got married 3 years ago and you just had your second kid and you're in an 800 square foot apartment and you need a bigger home and a better school district, you're not going to wait to see how this plays out. You're going to be in the market now. So my advice is just realize what is going to impact you in your time frame of wanting to buy in the next 3, 6, 12, even 24 months, and what is going to be longer term and to be determined.
Yeah. And with that, I think you said something important without saying it, and that's always focus on the longer term, right? Real estate is a long-term play. It is not a 2 to 3 year play. A lot of people have benefited over the last 2 to 3 years because of the volatility in the market and, just some shifting around and everything that came with the pandemic and a lack of supply. And so there's this belief out there that that's the way real estate should be. That's not how the wealthy made their money in real estate. They made it by buying, holding, and looking back and going, wow, I can't believe I bought that house for $50,000 and now it's $1.5 million. And I can say that because I'm constantly sitting down at the table with sellers who have owned their homes for extended periods of time going, I can't believe what housing has done. And at the time, they say, I didn't even know how I was going to make the payment. Right. And I'm not saying that's the advice that you should go out there and do at the moment. You should know that you can make the payment. You should have some money in the bank, be comfortable. But more importantly, the longer term time horizon is the key.
Well, Jeb, in support of what you just said of no one gets rich fast in real estate. When I bought my home in 2003, we paid $580,000, and my aunt had bought a very similar home 30 years before and paid $48,000. And so seeing that we paid 10 times what she paid said, you're insane. You're going to lose your ass. Now here we are 22, 23 years later, and the house has tripled in value. So that's a pretty darn good investment, but it didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen in a straight line. Shot up, dropped like everyone's house in 2008, 2009, 2010, slow grind back up to new highs, and then shot up during the pandemic. So you'll notice that in her 30 years, it went up 10x. In my 25 years, it's gone up 3x. Going forward, maybe it only goes up 1.5x. Any way you cut it, it's going to go up due to the effects of inflation, and having a 30-year fixed mortgage and the ability and the option to lower that 30-year fixed rate mortgage anytime rates drop is the reason why homeowners come out with 44 times greater net worth. So housing is at record low levels of affordability. It is hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of buying at current prices, but I bought into what people were looking at as insane prices, and it worked out really well. I don't expect 25 years from now, today's buyers are going to triple their money, but it would not shock me to see a 2x, a 1.5x with a fixed payment that is going to make them very happy over time.
And if Josh and I can be of any assistance in this process, make sure you're reaching out. We're here to help. We want to provide value, on the mortgage and the real estate side. So if we can be of any assistance to you at all, use that link in the description of the video. But until next time, make sure you're buying right, borrowing smart, building wealth. Adios.
Amigos.